People will say, oh, you don't have an issue with Hindus or Christians praying. Like, we don't have Hindus and Christians or Jews talking about wanting to form a caliphate in the country or talking about wanting to have world domination.
Banners saying, be on the right side of history, with a picture of the late, not so great Islamist butcher on it. The years and years and decades, in fact, in which this sort of carnival of hatred would be on London streets and no one would really say boo about it. There's a kind of peculiar sickness and complacency.
Even if, for example, we hypothetically close the borders, what do we do about the fact that we have people born in this country who have far more allegiance to their ethnic and religious beliefs than to Britain?
She thinks of herself as very special. Maybe the most specialist person who's ever lived, I don't know.
I think we need like a total complete shutdown on millennial politicians. Still we work out what the hell is going on.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, thrilled to be joined as ever by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Ali.
And one of our favourite returning guests from the Free Speech Union, Connie Shaw. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Plenty to discuss today. We'll be talking about the mother of all rows over Trafalgar Square and public Islamic prayer. We'll also be discussing Bob Vylan and the rise of Ayatollah Sheikh, and the gormlessness of Hannah Spencer, the Greens' newest MP. Before we get into all that, Tom, do you want to remind people about the Spiked Summit, our exciting event that's coming up?
Yes, exactly. So if you haven't heard about it already, the Spiked Summit is our biggest event ever. We're holding it on Saturday, the 27th of June at the Emmanuel Centre in Westminster. We've already got a bunch of brilliant speakers announced. Toby Young from the Free Speech Union is going to be there. Alison Pearson from the Telegraph, Constantine Kissin from Trigonometry, our own Brendan O'Neill, Catherine Burglesing, and many more speakers yet to be announced. So if you want to get your ticket, they are selling well, but there are still plenty left. Go to spiked-online.com and you'll see the link there. And of course, Spiked supporters get a very healthy discount. So if you support the show and support the website, do make sure you get your money off. Once again, spiked-online.com, click on the ad for the summit and get your tickets.
So the Conservative Shadow Justice Secretary, Nick Timothy, has sparked an enormous row. He's been calling out the use of Trafalgar Square for Islamic ritual prayer. He says he doesn't have any beef with Muslims using the space, using it for Ramadan, but there's something specific about the Adnam, that he says is about domination over public life and public space, saying that Islam is the one true faith. This has caused a huge uproar. There are demands for him to be sacked. Keir Starmer brought it up at Prime Minister's questions. It seems as if the email has gone out to every single Labour MP to tweet angrily about this and to call for Nick Timothy's head and to say that the Conservative Party is now an Islamophobic far-right party. Tom, what have you made of this discussion?
I think the outrage was predictable, but I think it's actually quite encouraging that it's sort of petered out as quickly as it has. I mean, even about 5 years ago, a Conservative minister, as it would have been then, making comments like this would have probably just been, put on gardening leave and then quietly shuffled out of the cabinet. The fact that hasn't happened, I think, is positive. What Nick Timothy said in that post is what a lot of people have been concerned about, which is that in the context of a rising Islamic sectarianism and even Islamism, extremist threat that stubbornly won't go away, there have been these kind of more ostentatious kind of public displays of religiosity, which in that context are going to concern people. He was also very careful in the post to say that, first of all, this was about very public expressions of religiosity and how that might be interpreted as divisive. He was also very careful to say that not everyone involved in that event would have been Islamist, but still this was out of the Islamist playbook. And he's right about that. Groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and elsewhere for a long time have taken to these kind of ostentatious displays in order to mix religion and politics, in order to try and express a kind of sense of domination. So he's entirely within his rights to call that out. If people want to take issue with him about whether or not, what are the standards here? Are you saying that certain religions are allowed to be in public spaces and do ritual prayer in public spaces and others aren't, whatever? His post should have been the start of a conversation, but obviously where the Labour Party and much of the commentariat is concerned, it has to be the end. His head must roll, all the rest of it. The fact that hasn't happened, I suppose, is the one positive, but it seems like this issue is going to continue to be a pretty key, now just sort of left-right dividing line in British politics, I suppose.
And Connie, I mean, this comes off the back of Labour introducing a new definition of anti-Muslim hostility, which is basically the same as Islamophobia, as we would have called it before. How do you see it fitting into that context?
Well, Steve Reed, the Housing Community Secretary, said very clearly in Parliament when the definition was announced that people would not be punished or labelled anti-Muslim hostile for criticising Islamic practices, yet that's exactly what's happened. So it's very helpful for the Free Speech Union to be able to see exactly what Labour always intended with this definition. And whether Labour MPs know it or not, Nick Timothy is an absolute hero. And when I saw his tweet, I just thought, I'm so grateful for him. And what these MPs don't realise is that Nick Timothy is so knowledgeable about this issue. You wouldn't speak about this issue in the way that he does. I mean, I suppose some people do, but he is so knowledgeable about it. And the issue is that many Labour MPs and politicians for generations, or especially in the last 10, 20 years, really do not understand Islam. And that's the issue that we have as in general in the West. We have this Einat Wilf, he's a Israeli ex-politician, calls it West-splaining, trying to see Islam and Islamism through the lens of a Western mind that can't understand the combination of the political motivations of Islam. Not all Muslims have the political stem in their faith, but some do, and that is what this situation we have in Trafalgar Square is doing, and also is legitimised by the fact that Sadiq Khan is also there. That's giving it the extra legitimization. And people will say, oh, you don't have an issue with Hindus or Christians praying. Like, we don't have Hindus and Christians or Jews talking about wanting to form a caliphate in the country or talking about wanting to have world domination. And when you hear people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali say very clearly what this is about, and no one will listen, that is the West-splaining, pretending that they're not actually saying what they're saying, and that it's like any other religion. There are westernized Muslims, but we have to accept that Islam is a very different religion to all of the others' main religions, and that's the issue. They just don't understand it.
And it is worth stressing that, in Britain, Islamic extremism is so bad that many Muslim countries have long been sounding the alarm. I mean, there was this story recently about, the United Arab Emirates saying they basically will not send their children to British universities. They will no longer subsidise their university courses because they will come back as Islamic extremists. So this is not a race issue. This is not about racism. This is simply calling out what I think people have every right to feel unsettled by, which is, whether it's simply Islamic sectarianism or Islamic extremism, those things are legitimate topics for public debate.
And people taking such offence to the phrase sort of this to dominate, or it's to dominate public space, again, is like not paying attention. I mean, kind of slogans like "we're not taking part, we're taking over" become sort of memes on sort of Islamic sectarian Twitter in this country. And the fact that in a time in which we have seen that burst out onto the streets since October the 7th, a time when Islamist extremism continues to be the most deadly terror threat that we face, the fact that in that context, the tone policing through to censorship, through to this anti-Muslim hostility czar and this effort to crack down further via not explicitly legal means, but kind of quasi-legal means on free expression and just the practice of councils and able to deal with these problems is genuinely I can't think of a kind of historical parallel for it. You have this real threat to anywhere between social cohesion and actual kind of life and limb, which the governing class, despite not being of that ideology, is desperately keen to police any discussion of. I can't think of any parallel for it, and particularly because if you are a member of the Labour Party and you do claim that you want to draw these kind of bright lines between the extremists, those who seek to divide us, versus British Muslims more broadly, you think you would be almost more interested in making clear what is acceptable, what isn't, where that line is, why integration is important, and what have you. That has completely gone by the wayside now, and they seem to be engaging almost in a kind of form of performative Islamophilia in order to dismiss this as a problem whatsoever, which is only going to generate precisely more of the concern in the country than there are already, even more so than there already is at this point.
Yeah, and it was interesting seeing, Lucy Powell, the deputy Labour leader, reacting to this, and she said, "We all criticise Islamist extremism, but." And then I think, well, actually, when have you ever criticised Islamist extremism? She couldn't criticise Islamist extremism.
She'd probably call it a dog whistle.
Yeah, even in the wake of the Manchester Arena bombing, she objected to Andrew Neil's use of the word Islamist. As you said, Connie, she referred to the Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs as a dog whistle issue, something that only racists would want to talk about. Sadiq Khan, I'm happy to be corrected, but I've never heard him criticise Islamist extremism, despite there being multiple Islamist terror attacks on London while he's been the mayor. Again, no one is saying that they are pro-terrorist or anything like that, but the unwillingness to call out these things is extremely alarming, and it's something that, it's an urgent matter of debate.
The most shocking thing that I've seen recently, and this was before the outrage over Nick Timothy, I think, was Dawn Butler's comments in Parliament saying that the far right is a bigger threat than Islamism. And she even said, I saw the clip on Katie Lamb's Instagram. I don't know whether she was referring to Katie Lamb specifically. She said, and I hope Muslims will be praying for your soul during Ramadan, because Katie Lamb has the audacity to say that Islamism is the biggest threat to us in the country. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And it's just very hard to understand what their motivation is, and who can blame the public for just seeing it as Labour trying to appeal to Muslim votes that they are desperate to keep from going over to the Green Party, which they've already lost. I don't understand why they're still trying to hold on to it. It's gone. And so it's quite sad, actually, because, let the Greens do that. And why would they? They're a bit like what happened in Denmark, and what Shabana Mahmood has been trying to say is that when they had a party like Reform on the right, the Social Democratic Party decided that they had to do something about immigration and about social cohesion, and then they stopped the threat of their equivalent of the Reform Party. But it seems that many Labour MPs, and now obviously we've heard that there are rumours of Labour MPs who want to defect the Greens, and maybe the Labour Party would be far better off for that. It's just extraordinary to see the denial continuously.
And just to go back to your point about, it seems like the end point of all of this is just a prohibition on talking about Islamic practice, religion more broadly. You do have to remind people it is totally legitimate to criticise a religion, any religion. It's something,
and its practices, not just what it says in the book, but the way that people
and not just the extremists. Like, you're allowed to criticise any aspect of religion
and culture within that particular religion, as you see it expressed. All of these things are totally legitimate forms of debate. I mean, freedom of speech in this country and many countries was largely built on the ability of people to criticise gods, prophets, clerics. This is really foundational, but for largely it seems kind of identitarian reasons, to a certain extent, electoral calculation as well, that's become verboten in a way that it wasn't even 10 or 15 years ago, where you would see discussions on mainstream news media about questions like the burqa or about questions of Sharia. These are things that you can kind of find clips of, and it would almost never happen now, because the discussion would be deemed by just illegitimate in and of itself, right, before you even got into any of the points. So the fact that this is accelerated in the context of all these rising problems is just frankly sort of suicidal from the perspective of so many people who claim to care about a liberal, just, even progressive society.
That's why it's so amazing to see Nick Timothy double down. I mean, it's something that we say to our cases at the FSU, the worst thing you can do is apologise, and I never doubted that he would double down, but it's just fantastic, and I can't express how grateful I am for people like him, because whether Labour MPs know it or not, that he's saving them.
And also important as well for the leadership there to back him, because he could easily have been sacked. I want to talk about another display, I guess, of whether you call it Islamic domination, I don't know, but the Al-Quds Day march on Sunday. So if people don't know, Al-Quds Day has been going on for many decades. It was actually founded by the first Iranian supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini.
Bit of a tell right there.
Bit of a tell,
what goes on. But
so it's obviously presented as a pro-Palestine event. Al-Quds is the Arabic word for Jerusalem. But clearly, the fact that it's founded by the Ayatollah, the fact that it's associated with the Islamic Republic, I just don't think you can't hide what this is really about, Tom. I mean, and people were not hiding that, actually, as it happens at the march. They were, holding banners and waving placards, praising the late Ayatollah, the one that was most recently killed in the war. It's this scary stuff.
It is. This was the year that I suppose the mask slipped, but it slipped a long time ago, really. I mean, obviously, with the Ayatollah having been recently dispatched in the US-Israel war with Iran, it just gave way to just sort of teary-eyed memorials to him, banners saying "Be on the right side of history" with a picture of the late, not so great Islamist butcher on it. From the platform at the demonstration, there was a representative of the Islamic Human Rights Commission. It's an organisation with a very trolly name for reasons that we might get into.
So it's slightly different conception of human rights than we might have.
Yes.
To put it mildly.
Openly referring to Hamnei as a martyr. People waving, again, placards quite clearly calling for the destruction of Israel. There's one person who got arrested for a bomb Tel Aviv sign. But this has been going on for a long time. I mean, there was actually a memo that was circulating in the Home Office ahead of the demonstration on the weekend, because of course it's normally in March, but it was downgraded to this static protest because concerns were raised, and the Met Police actually asked for it to be explicitly banned. Just pointing out that for many years now, it has been a sort of magnet for anti-Semitism and support for proscribed organisations. It was back in 2008 or thereabouts, I think, Jeremy Corbyn was photographed addressing the crowd flanked by Hezbollah flags, which is illegal to own or fly in this country, certainly at this point. So it's been an open secret that event, that annual demonstration, under the guise of being pro-Palestine, was just pro-Islamic Republic and many of the other kind of scumbags they're in. But this year that just came out crashing to the surface. And again, it raises so many questions about, obviously the discussion is focused on whether or not the march should have been banned. I don't think, as ever, kind of, authoritarianism is the answer to all this. I'm glad that we can see this for what it is, but I do just wonder why no one was noticing for the years and years and decades, in fact, in which this sort of carnival of hatred would be on London streets, and no one would really say boo about it. There's a kind of peculiar sickness and complacency which we're now having to reckon with.
Connie, what did you make of it?
Well, I don't have any objections to the limits that the police put on the march, because this is the equivalent of having a pro-Hitler rally during World War II. We are effectively at war with Iran, whether people like to admit it or not. And that it was, like Tom was saying, it's a blatant display of support for a terrorist regime. And there was also a Taliban flag on display as well, which was just, I mean, can you think about like British soldiers that fought in Afghanistan for all that time, just to now see the flag of the Taliban to be flown on the streets of London? I mean, the betrayal of that. I mean, of course, everything else that happened in Afghanistan when we pulled out in 2021, or when America, pulled out in 2021. But to see that is just shocking. And at the same time, I agree, Tom, it's good to be able to display the fact that we have these people here. And speaking to some journalists who went, I've heard that they saw buses of people being bussed in to go to this march. Like, I'm sure people from all across the country had come down to go to it. I mean, it's just everyone's been saying for a long time, what point do people start to realise that there is such a huge issue here? But then again, what is the solution? How do you de-radicalise people? Are we, I think, in some ways, even if, for example, we hypothetically close the borders, what do we do about the fact that we have people born in this country who are have far more allegiance to their ethnic and religious beliefs than to Britain? And that is a huge issue that we're going to have to deal with. And it's going to be quite uncomfortable to come to terms with it, the fact that we have our own homegrown terrorists now. I mean, even the 7/7 bombers. I watched a documentary about it recently, and the narrator was saying, how was it that 4 British boys ended up blowing up the streets of London? It's like, well, they had allegiances to Pakistan, and we're going to have to come to grips with this. It's a very difficult conversation to have.
And the fact, and as we've been saying, it's a conversation that people are refusing to have, or refusing to even acknowledge that the problem even exists. Tom, I did want to ask you about one character in particular who appeared at the Al-Quds Day protest, Bob Vylan, of Glastonbury fame. I was almost disappointed the BBC weren't live streaming the whole event and all the speeches, because they would have been on board with that. But what did you make of that? You wrote a great piece on it earlier this week on his appearance.
I mean, I think it just exploded any of Bobby Vylan.
Sorry, Bob Vylan is the band. Bobby Vylan is the man, Pascal Robinson Foster.
Exactly, Pascal Robinson Foster. We should actually say his proper double-barrel names. I think that's somewhat revealing to a certain extent. Ipswich owns Pascal Robinson Foster.
Which I'm from Ipswich, so it's quite, I don't claim him.
Giving him a bad name, giving the place a bad name. But no, it's to stand on a platform in front of a picture of the Ayatollah chanting death to the IDF, a slogan that up until about 5 minutes ago you were claiming it's just about ending the Israeli occupation. He told Louis Theroux to go, someone we'll talk about a little bit later on his podcast, that the only reason I chose the word death is because it rhymes with IDF. It's got nothing to do with calling for the killing of soldiers who are expected to serve in the Israeli army to protect themselves from anti-Semitic genocidal forces. It's not anything blood-curdling or concerning at all. It's just about the Palestinians. It's just about the downtrodden and oppressed of the world. Meanwhile, you're standing in front of the picture of a man who, before he was killed in a missile strike had just slaughtered up to 30,000 of his own people. If we don't see what this is now, we never really will. And I said this in the piece, but I think there was a while there where we tend to kind of dismiss a lot of the kind of progressive wing of the pro-Palestine movement as just useful idiots. They've been sold the kind of Amnesty International line on this conflict, shorn of any of the history, shorn of any of the details about what a group like Hamas actually is and represents, convinced that the horrors that were inflicted on the people of southern Israel on that day was just made up or exaggerated or whatever. And that, again, they've just been misled. I don't think that holds for Bob Vylan. For many of the people that we've been talking about recently, I think there's an extent to which, first of all, they're very aware of what it is that they're flirting with. I also think they kind of get off on it. I think there's an element of you see it in the kind of cockiness with which they recite these chants, that there's a sort of frisson they get from saying something which is clearly sending shudders through much of the country. And also a certain sort of Ayatollah chic or a sort of Islamist chic that they get from rubbing shoulders with these 7th century nostalgists. You know, it's maybe this is a kind of this is almost cultural as much as it is political, but that was always the thing that really disturbed me about the Glastonbury controversy as much as anything else. It wasn't just the fact that this was being chanted from the stage and live streamed and wasn't cut and all the rest of it. It's the fact that people were just chanting it back as well. The sense that this has just become a part and parcel of being a sort of edgy cultural person. That is, again, is something that is really important that we get to grips with, because if this was just a sort of political activist in the mold of someone out the Stop the War Coalition, we know what that is, but this is in a slightly different space now, and it's just become kind of supposedly edgy and interesting to engage in the most sort of despicable, morally depraved rhetoric possible. And this was just a reminder of that. And any of the excuses that were made by Bobby Vylan or for him, just, I think, lying tatters on the floor now.
Absolutely. Connie, do you want to say anything else?
My question would be to these people is, what is your end goal? What would your world, your utopia look like? Because I think they would, but what we understand to be their end goal is something that I don't think they would be very happy with. Do they want to live in an Islamist, Jew-hating society? Because that is what everything they're doing. That's supposedly what the end result is. And I don't think that's what they would want. So it's similar. I mean, I see a lot of similarities between trans activism and being able to talk about Islam, because not least because you get called transphobic or Islamophobic. There are the blasphemy laws that are part of the culture that you get cancelled for talking about it. But when you talk to trans activists, they cannot hold up their own argument. I would like to see, you don't see many debates between people who are concerned about this and people who are supposedly in favour of living under a caliphate. But even, GB News, when Alex Armstrong was going down there, the Islamic Human Rights Commission was stopping him from speaking to people, even people that he wanted to speak to. He was being prevented from having those conversations. What is it they're so scared of? It's the same as when you try and speak to trans activists. I can't imagine the other side of the argument ever not wanting to talk. If you really knew what you were speaking about, I would love to have a Pink News journalist come up to me at a women's rights protest, but you don't see that because they know that they couldn't hold it up, and that's why they don't want to talk about it. So that would be my question to them.
And they don't fundamentally believe in debate or free speech or any of those important values. But actually, the trans activist Islamist kind of pipeline or crossover or whatever, collaboration, whatever you want to call it, brings us on quite nicely to our next topic, which is Hannah Spencer, the Green Party's newest MP. She gave her maiden speech last week, and she gave a shout out to her trans siblings and to all of the Muslims who voted for her. But there was a really, really funny interview she gave to the Manchester Evening News, where she proclaimed that she'd done more work in 2 weeks than most other MPs had done in a year. And we know that even before she'd been sworn into Parliament, she was at that dancing event that we talked about the other week. She was immediately, using her time as the MP to do the foxtrot or whatever. So
if you had an opportunity to meet Gloria Hunniford, though, Fraser, you would jump at that.
Yeah, that's true. But it does suggest that, I think it's fair to say she thinks of herself as very special. Maybe the most specialist person who's ever lived. I don't know. But Tom, what do you think of Hannah Spencer? What do you think about what she says about the Greens, this moment we're living through?
I think there's a generational thing. I think we need like a total and complete shutdown on millennial politicians. Still, we work out what the hell is going on. No, it's they were kind of a piece. If you think about Hannah Spencer, someone like Mary Black in America, someone like AOC, what they all have in common is not that they're all women, but it's the fact that they're all millennials. Our generation, the worst generation. No, it's just that element of just in remarkable self-regard. Obviously, we'll get into the politics of Hannah Spencer and the Green Party in a second, and we've kind of previewed it with some of our discussions already. But this remarkable kind of mix of self-importance and shallowness, it seems to exist. These are people who are, their politics was sort of reared on social media, maybe for the first generation in which for that to happen. The way in which in Parliament, particularly a kind of younger generation of politicians, you feel like every intervention is purely so it can be clipped up for social media. And that kind of sense that even just that by dint of being there, they've made some sort of wonderful step forward for their constituency or for their identity group or for their cause or what have you. It's really infuriating and kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with the just general kind of lack of substance that we're seeing with a lot of politicians now. It feels like the particularly progressive parties, though not exclusively, are selecting for all of the wrong things at the moment, and you just end up with someone who has confused virtue signalling and preening for politics. And I think in Hannah Spencer you just see the kind of most glaring example of that, I guess.
Connie, what do you make of her? I mean, I don't know. Do you think it's unfair that people have been poking fun at her dress sense and things like that? She does look like a CBeebies presenter to me. She was selected by The Guardian as one of the best dressed at Glastonbury several years ago. You can find an old article of a younger 22-year-old Hannah Spencer looking like people who dress at Glastonbury do. But
well, I think people should be able to mock clothing no matter who's wearing it, actually. And Tom, you said something interesting there. You said it's not because they're all women, but actually we do have an issue with the fact that millennial women and women younger are going to the extreme left, and we hear about the divide between young men and women, boys going to the right, girls going to the left. But then other research that's been done is boys haven't necessarily moved, it's girls going to the far left. And we do have a serious issue with young women, I don't know if that's the right phrase to use for Hannah Spencer, but women of a certain generation who have this suicidal empathy, and this is a form of what I think could be described as toxic femininity. I think there is an issue amongst women because they feel that they can get social credit from other women by being in favour of this type of politics. So actually, there is a reason why many of these politicians that you named are women, and it is for some sad reason that women have been convinced that the most important thing to do is to be kind, even if that means throwing the entire country and your own safety under the bus. So actually, I think it is quite important that the fact that these are all women that you happen to name.
It is interesting, though. I don't know if people saw this poll recently that suggested that Reform and the Conservatives are the most popular parties among women in general. And it is only young women who are sort of going green. And Reform also the most popular party among gay people, which is a conversation for another day.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, but I won't go into that now.
Everyone should understand why, but yeah. Tom, is there anything else you want to say on the Greens in particular? I mean, it is just a kind of, I know we call them left or far left for shorthand, but it is also, this is a party of luxury beliefs, if nothing else. It's not, Hannah Spencer calls herself working class, she says she's a plumber.
That's a big question mark.
Lots of question marks over that. But in any case, clearly this is not a politics that is based in, the workers' struggle or anything of that nature. And, she subscribes to all the bourgeois beliefs, post-borders, post-gender, post-sex or whatever. This is a particularly bizarre party that speaks for, maybe they can get over the line through Islamic sectarianism, through that kind of vote, but actually it's a tiny, tiny minority of people in the country who actually share those views.
Yeah, and I think the desperation to present her as a sort of working class figure.
Rosie the Riveter type.
Yeah, it's the sort of tell about the lack of working class credentials within the Green Party or within Spencer herself, to be perfectly frank. And it's one of those things where I'm also really struck by, we've talked a lot on the podcasts in recent months about how reactionary and unpleasant and become a kind of magnet for all the worst forces in politics that the current Green Party now is. But it's also just how stupid it is. I do think that's part of the reason that people are able to, like Hannah Spencer, are able to say things like the reason Manchester Arena happened was because of people like Matt Goodwin stirring up division. As if Salman Abedi was minding his own business one day and he happened across one of Nigel Farage's speeches from the European Parliament. You know what I'm going to do to that? Like, it's dumb. as much as anything else. You understand where it comes from, a kind of combination of kind of cognitive dissonance and just plain old ignorance. But it's just, I think that's one of the things that fuels this, is it's just entirely resistant to any kind of deep thinking, perfectly suited to the social media age, and also perfectly suited to a kind of politician, as I say, who to a man and woman, certainly with Zach Plansky and Hannah Spencer, are like frustrated theatre kids playing at politics, and with all of the depth that would imply.
Definitely. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Connie. That's the end of our public conversation. But if you're a Spike supporter, you can join us right now for Spike Podcast Unlocked, where we'll be discussing Louis Theroux's new doc on the manosphere and our own Connie Shaw's battles with UCL students talking about women's rights. So don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching the Spiked Podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.